Hello and welcome to another video in SSD testing for the PS5. I've bench tested many SSDs, most of which were done during the beta phase of the software update. This is one such video. Now, everyone has access to SSD upgrades on the PS5 right now, but I did think it was important that before you watch this video, you know this was recorded on the beta. It won't make any difference to the performance. SSDs work just the same right now as they did when this software update was made available in beta, but I didn't want you guys to watch this and think, oh, this is a little bit out of date. It still works absolutely fine. Let's run the intro. Hello and welcome back, and today it's time for another test of the PS5 SSD expansion bay, and today we are revisiting, as the title card suggests, the Rocket NVMe 4.0. It is their second tier PCIe Gen 4 SSD. We've already moved a bunch of games over, though it should be highlighted that this is the SSD that is under the performance threshold recommended by Sony PlayStation. I think that's really important that we highlight that early doors, because a number of you who are looking at Sabrent and their range of SSDs may not be aware that you might think, oh wow, I'm getting a good deal on this, I've seen it so much more expensive elsewhere. There's a very good chance that the SSD you're looking at isn't the Rocket Plus series. You might be looking at the Rocket NVMe 4.0 or even the Rocket Q4 series. This is the NVMe 4.0, that is actually the model ID, how to identify it. And this is the SSD that in previous testings never really let us down, even though it's quite close to the mark at 4,900 megabytes per second and 5,100 megabytes per second across the range, sequential read. But these are today's games: Hitman 3, Terminator Resistance, No Man's Sky, Red Dead Redemption, and Dead by Daylight. These are the games that we're going to be utilising, and we're going to be looking at how the game loads individual instances inside each game, and we're also going to be looking at textures, draw distance, individual assets being swapped in and out, lots of hidden loading screens and more. So let's get straight into it. So our first game is Hitman 3. We've tested it before. We've got two load sessions from here in the Dartmoor level and the Mendoza level. We aren't looking at how long it takes to load the game because there are several instances of internet connectivity during the loading screen of this game. And although, yes, we could try to compare them side by side with the internal SSD, to be perfectly honest, it's just not going to be fair with all that internet connectivity. There's too many variables. So for now, let's go ahead and load straight into the game and load this bespoke mission. We're not going for the campaign mission because it's got a load of cutscenes and mid-level cutscenes as well, and setup pieces, stuff that, you know, will kind of undermine the comparison between this and the internal SSD. So if we go for these custom missions like this one, this is the Bakerville Barney. From here, we're able to load the game up and then concentrate purely on the in-game assets. So let's go for it now in 3, 2, 1. We're going to have that loading there, and as this loads into the game, we're going to do a quick pan-in shot of the surrounding environment, and then of course we're going to kind of see if we can challenge the game to reveal any difficulties about loading assets. The world is loaded here, all of the surrounding environment, all that lovely draw distance is there. So now let's make our way through the level here. It may get pixelated throughout the course of this video, and that is going to be like the video noise as we make our way through this. Unfortunately, it's very hard to avoid that due to a conflict between the capture card and the PS5 here. I am working on that, but for now, the results still speak for themselves. You can still make out what we are aiming for here. And as we make our way along this area of the game, we can get ready to bench test some of the assets in this game and see whether it's going to load things absolutely fine. Those lighting effects there running all the way through. We can cap this guy here, and then from this point we can quickly change clothes with him to buy a little bit of time making our way through this property. Because what we're doing here is we want to kind of see just how much of the game is loading to make sure there isn't any loading asset problems there in the background, and just to know that this isn't going to be an SSD that's going to struggle on some of the stuff that we do. So right now we're pushing through as much of the game as possible, forcing the game to load in and out certain assets. So that means if the game is going to struggle with this SSD, hopefully these inconsistencies will reveal themselves. that whether that is textures that as we get close to them don't load quickly enough into their high definition, or like as we saw there, ones that snap in place just in time. The real trick is to not look at the character, is to look into the distance to see which textures are popping in and out. But for now, this is running 100% fine. We're not seeing any problems. The frame rate hasn't dropped, no texture problems. The AI is still doing absolutely fine. I'd call that a success. So let's make our way into the other save. This is one that, although it's a larger area of game, what we're measuring here isn't the kind of standard on-screen assets. What we're looking at here on the Mendoza level is the handling of the AI textures, of course, because they're involved in it. But this is a level with a huge number of NPCs. Let's go. 3, 2, 1. As we load into it here, genuinely the only thing we're looking for here is how the game handles those NPCs. The rest of it, we're of course going to have a look while we're going around at the surrounding textures, looking around at how it handles some of the lighting effects, the tree effects, that sort of thing. But predominantly, what we care about the most right now is that when we get into the NPC area, that we don't see any difficulty in how the game handles this large scale number of NPCs. Now that can translate into a drop in frame rate. It can translate itself into T-poses on the NPCs. It can translate into textures not popping in and out correctly as we approach people, and the game is choosing which textures to swap in from high to medium to low and in reverse as we move in and out of the scene. So if we move into it here, lots of NPCs here that we can sort of mingle in between and to kind of get the game, if it's going to struggle, to push some of those in and out. But it's seemingly running fine. I'm intentionally trying to bump into as many as possible here, see if we can force the game to have to work a little harder. But for now, again, it's working fine. I think a lot of these like pops, it's really the game's problem there. As you can see, if you look over the edge, you can see the vineyards there getting populated as we get closer. But if we walk away, they remain in that high texture. Again, that's part of the game's loading. That's fine because they've already loaded them into the world. But what we're trying to do is tax this as much as possible. But for now, I think this is running absolutely fine. No drops. The lighting effects are great. And although I know the recording is going to be a bit pixelated for you guys, I can tell you right now that what we're watching right now, the recording here is absolutely fine. So let's come out of Hitman and go to our next game, Terminator Resistance. Loading up Terminator Resistance right now. Again, this is a single load scenario we're going for here. It's taking advantage of being the Terminator in the infiltrator mode or infiltration. We're not looking at how long it takes to load the game. For now, what we're looking at is this area and how well it handles a lot of the lighting, more so than anything, I believe. So if we go for it here, again, this is going to be loading and then a cutscene, but we're going to leave the cutscene and I'll explain why in a moment. 3, 2, 1. Leave it to load that mode there. As mentioned, there is a cutscene here, but we have noticed that some of the SSDs that really struggle seemingly have difficulty loading this cutscene immediately, and sometimes there's been slight stuttering there. I'm pleased to say right now that I'm not seeing any examples of that, which is still good to see. And it looks like we're going to load into the game fine. We can skip this cutscene, but I'm choosing not to, just because we had noticed that lots of stuff like some of the lighting there, this is definitely an already pre-recorded FMV. This is not being built on in-game graphics every single time. But still, it somehow really made the system struggle on some of the lesser SSDs that were pulling this big video file when it was obviously pulling game assets at the same time. But for now, let's head in. So again, we can turn that Terminator camera off, or we can flick to that vision mode. Let's be honest, it's an absolute retro favourite to just leave that on. It's too good not to have it on there. And again, we can do quite a lot with these guys, including some quite savagely long distance throws. But for now, let's make our way through the game and have a little look around the surrounding environment that this game finds itself within. Again, I will turn this camera off periodically so we can sort of see the map as it is with some of that nice hazy lighting effects that really does an incredible job of nailing down that aesthetic of the Terminator flashback sequences. Again, a lot more complex than I think a lot of people give it credit for. This is still a very good job of lighting and asset management here. Right now, I think that's fine. Again, this guy seems to be standing in thin air. That can't be good. But I think it's very tough to blame that on the SSD, but still nonetheless, good night. Get rid of him into the ether. But I think for now, that's absolutely fine by me. I think we can make our way onto our next game, of course, which is No Man's Sky. Now, No Man's Sky, we're going with the creative mode. So what we're doing here is loading up No Man's Sky to get to a point where we can load that creative mode, and then from there we're going to perform several actions. We're going to get into the ship on the random planet that it introduces us on, keyword random, and then take ourselves to a space station, explore for a few seconds, jump in the plane, head back down to a planet. The idea is to tax the system to get it to work very hard and see if we can get it to make an error in some of those textures, thereby highlighting that the game isn't, able to run on this SSD as well as we would like. I'm just removing a couple of those saves to make it easy. But for now, let's load in. Again, fresh save. It's no point when we have these running side by side on the PS5 SSD and here on the Sabrent NVMe 4.0, it's worth highlighting that they're not going to be the same world. It's randomized. We are looking at how well these handle each of the transitions between the different areas, not how quickly side by side. So let's go in now in 3, 2, 1. Heading in, there'll be a drop in frame rate any second now. Always happens during the No Man's Sky logo. No idea why. Always annoying. Been like that since the PS4 and it continues today. The game is definitely checking out other known planets or identified stuff, and it's pulling that information in, but still nonetheless super annoying. Anyway, so here we are on a new planet. So let's go ahead and take to the skies. There will be quite noisy video images here, so I apologize in advance for those. As we go, as you see there, a lot of pixelation there. I can't see that, but I know you guys can. And what we're doing right now is making our way to that space station. It's appearing that on our map we saw a little bit of texture pop there. I think we can kind of forgive that. I think I'm not going to blame that on the SSD. But for now, let's carry on moving forward. And we're arriving in the space station again. And it says 9 seconds, but again, that's all relative in this game. This game does a very good job of hiding a lot of the loading times throughout. Incredibly sneaky a lot of the time to make it feel so fantastically organic. But still, nonetheless, let's make our way in as we find out that the entrance isn't that side. And we try to make our way in. Never gone into a ship of this scale before. So let's find out if we can still, yep, there we go. We'll move into the spaceport here. And again, we're going to step out very quickly. We are seeing a few more texture pops here, I've got to say. They're not quite as smooth as I've seen previously. There's definitely a few little extra pops there. Whether that is just a one-off here, we'll look out for it when we land on the planet next. But for now, let's rocket up to the shop deck here. We've got the usual AI sort of wandering around shops and more. But for now, let's head back, because what we're doing is getting the game to kind of destroy some of those earlier assets so we can make our way in, and we'll see if the SSD can keep up with what we're trying to do. So let's take to the skies and find a nearby planet to land. Why not? That's a normal sentence, isn't it? Let's go in. We're going to this unknown planet here. Again, I know there's pixelation. And for now, what we're doing is rocketing down to the ground. The game is hiding a lot of the assets and the transition there with that red environmental change there. And I do think we are still seeing a little bit of that clipping there. And for now we're going to go straight into a loading sequence, landing sequence. And for now, I think the game has loaded those assets, but it's popped them in. There's quite a few examples of texture pop there. Again, no end of the world, and we are pushing this quite hard, but it would be foolish of me not to at least highlight a lot of that texture popping during those transitions. But let's move on to our next game, which is Red Dead Redemption 2. And this is one where we're going to go a straightforward game load. We're going straight into the Blackwater town. But it's worth highlighting this is at the end of the game. And although I'm not going to say spoilers aloud, there's definitely a spoiler. So if you haven't completed Red Dead Redemption 2, or you're hoping to play it and complete it soon, maybe skip this one a few minutes, because there is a major spoiler included. And it's unavoidable. As soon as I load the game, it will give away a significant body of plot. So for you guys, please skip it if you haven't played it yet. But otherwise, let's go in at 3, 2, 1. It's a bit of a slow loader, this one. Again, a lot of information. I don't know if you saw that when we were transitioning the data back. This game is over 100 gig. And for a PS4 base level game, bigger than any of the other PS5 games we've tested so far. There's a lot of data assets here. And again, you can see it's such a beautiful game. But what we're looking at here is the start the game in Blackwater there. We're going to use the inside camera so we can see textures nice up and close and personal on the SSD. Rather than the external, the PS5 internal SSD, which doesn't use the internal camera that we're going to be using. And what we're looking at is just how well the game runs. We're looking at, can it maintain that frame rate? Do the textures remain unblurry? Is it able to swap those textures out easily? We're in the game. Let's carry on. So we'll go inside camera. Thank you very much. Let's call our horse. And then from there, we're just going to go for a very brief ride around town. Hopefully not getting into too much trouble, but we'll see. And then we'll make our way inside an area of the map. It's very hard to ride the horse, by the way, in first-person view. I do not recommend it. It's super tough. It does not feel anywhere near as responsive as you think it should. But for now, we've got the speed, we've got the frame rate. Sorry about my phone there. So many stupid messages today. But for now, we can keep moving forward. And I think for now, we can start making our way into another area of the map to see if the transition is smooth. So again, let's make our way to the saloon. Oh, I feel sorry for that guy. That was kind of a dick move on my part. But for now, let's go ahead and jump off the horse. Make our way into the bar. And then from there, see if there's any texture problems. But no, all running fine. The game's running how I would expect. And overall, I'm happy with that. So let's make our way into our last game here. Our last game, of course, is Dead by Daylight. So let's come out of that there and go into it. Loading out of this. Dead by Daylight, compared with Red Dead Redemption 2, is almost rudimentary in its graphics. It's quite a large game with a significant online presence. It has to be said. It's done incredibly well. For a game that's largely multiplayer only. It does have single player, but nowhere near the multiplayer support that the game has had in all those DLCs. The reason we include it here is it does use, arguably, very inefficient asset loading compared to a lot of modern games. Even though this game isn't that old, it really, works very hard in the loading just to load up a single game. And this is one that we're going with that's going to have bots. This isn't even an online lobby. We're only going with offline modes. And even then, given the graphics of the game, that they're nice, but they're not exactly breathtaking. The game does have a surprisingly inefficient load method of assets into the game in real time. Even the low, medium, high texture transition is nowhere near as complex on this game as a number of other games we've tested in the last few weeks. So do bear that in mind as we go through this. So I'm going to go with Survive with Bots. And again, what we're looking at here, we're not going to try and play the game. We're just going to explore the local area environment to see if the game's going to have any difficulty loading in those assets, just to see how well the Sabrent NVMe 4.0 deals with this particular game. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. Once again, as we go into this, just bear in mind that as we're comparing this against the internal SSD, both instances you're seeing here of the Sabrent and the PlayStation's own SSD at the top left, top right of the screen are offline mode. There's no delays being caused by any online lobbying or anything like that. This is a pure bots, single player only, that we're utilizing to measure the performance. So for now, one of the earliest things you're probably going to spot while we're running here is if you look into the distance, you're going to see those textures being brought in. Unlike a lot of games that take advantage of a much more complex low, medium, high texture build, this game doesn't actually do that many. And a lot of the time we do see the assets just pop in. Oh, there we go. We really don't want to go near that guy. It's a bit early doors for this. But yep, let's go in. We're looking around the assets. Let's go into this big building here and double check that the game is going to load it okay with no problems at all, graphically or more. My friend is getting closer all the time. Hopefully he will allow us to continue getting some of these assets together and having a look and see how the game plays through. But for now, we're making our way into another open area here, and I'm not seeing any delays. I'm not even seeing any bad texture pops. I'm not seeing any difficulties throughout. I think we may have lost our friend. No, we haven't. But for now, I think I would call that a success, what we've done so far. The lighting effects there, some of these glow and beam in and out like that one. But some of them, you can see them being generated there, like those lights being sort of faded into life as we move forward. And again, that's not really the SSD. That's the general kind of game load system that we've seen previously. But for now, let's come out of this game and move all these games back onto the internal SSD so we can talk about the results so far. So let's move the games and apps. There's our 5 games on the M.2 NVMe storage. Let's move them over and discuss it. So this is still an SSD that is below the recommended minimum 5,500 megabytes per second performance threshold of the PS5 expansion bay. And a lot of that is based on the internal performance of the PlayStation's own SSD. So it makes sense that they would not want an SSD that goes in lower than that. But of course, some people would make the argument that this SSD will do fine for the next few years, and it won't be until games are fully able to harness the hardware inside the PS5 that you'll need an SSD that can meet that standard. There's arguments on both sides. Personally, I think it's worth spending a little bit more and getting a better SSD. I think this has done a sterling job, and short of a few kind of asset management pops that we saw in No Man's Sky that I was less than enthused about, on the whole, the Sabrent Rocket NVMe 4.0 still maintained the frames per second, still loaded the games remarkably well, and I do think probably, we'll check in post-production, compared very well against the internal SSD inside the PS5. It's a great budget option, but I would be remiss to say that I would make it any kind of recommendation. If you do want to know which SSDs I do recommend for PS5, I've linked to my top 5 and top 5 if you're on a budget SSDs in the description. Alongside that, there's recommendations for the right heatsink. Very, very important to keep your SSD as cool as possible. So I've made 5 recommendations down there. Do check those out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, I've done lots of testing with this SSD and others. So do check them out in the archive and click like so I know you enjoyed it. Other than that, if you click subscribe, you'll know about more SSDs as they get tested and uploaded here on the channel, and therefore help you choose the right SSD when Sony enable this feature very, very soon. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.